Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Joseph Floyd of Sound It Plain, and I'm here to talk to you about the nation's rage, wars and rumors of wars, part 3, the necessity, at least according to Jesus' words. Why must these things take place? Why must there be wars? Is it really necessary? Do we have to go? After all, Jesus is the Prince of Peace. We want peace. But he said these things must take place over in Matthew 24. Stay with me in the next few minutes as we talk about wars, rumors and birth pains in a series I've been doing. And all this leads up to the final campaign and the final battle, and when Jesus will come and deal with it all. But why did he say over in Matthew 24, verses 6 through 8, his disciples asked him a question about the destruction of the temple, the end of the age, and his setting up of his kingdom? And they're all tied together. They're all linked. You see, when the temple fell in 70 AD, it was under Roman occupation. They had been occupied before. They went back into exile, the children of Israel. But wars have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. Men have fought over pieces of land. They fought over jewelry, or they fought over wealth. They've fought for people. They've even fought to annihilate people groups. And that's one of the main things that they just become enemies. And it's been going on since the beginning of back in the Tower of Babel, ever since nations, the confusing of the language, and they couldn't communicate, and they started wanting to do their things. But there's 4 things I want to talk about. Number 1 is in Psalm 2, is the nation's rage. And the question is asked, why? The kings of the earth, they're fighting for power. They want to come out from under God's leadership. They don't want to be, they think his leadership is burdensome and cumbersome, but they're going to find out in the age to come that it's really peaceful. It's quite excellent. It's most perfect. But because of this rage, because of their desire to get out and run it, they fight, because you have sheep and goat nations. Those nations that have surrendered to the ways of the Lord. Those that don't want to be discipled, that want to go their own way. And we see that in conflicts today. We see it all over the world continually. We see rogue regimes and draconian laws and oligarchs, and we could go on with the names, but we see people groups constantly being bombarded because of the kings of the earth want to have their way and not submit to the rulership of the Lord. And the nations are Jesus' inheritance. God's laughing at their plans. And another one of these reasons is to cause us to cry out for his return. And because we're the bride of Christ, are believers, we're going to marry Christ, followers, true disciples. That means that the nations become our inheritance too. But yet we are of the nations. And yes, Israel's a nation too. It's chief among nations. So to get us to cry out with the Holy Spirit for the return of the King. You see the people in Ukraine suffering right now. You see, and even the people in Russia now, they're going to suffer because of the mistakes, because of the tyrannical wickedness of certain rulers, because of their controlling armies and wanting to take territory or take whatever it is, whatever. Their people will suffer. There's another reason these things must take place is to it's a spiritual battle. Ever since Adam and Eve lost the title deed to this planet, Satan had rulership, and he lost it when Jesus took it back. And he left us in charge. He left us to take it. It's an invisible kingdom. He's not here right now present, so we're not taking over governments. We're not taking over, but we are to influence and we are to advance His kingdom. But it's a spiritual battle, and it requires a lot of prayer. It requires a lot of our worship and our efforts and outreach and other things. And then these things take place. Oftentimes, God uses these things to purge people. Now, He doesn't create wars, He doesn't establish them, but He allows and uses them because men make these choices. Most recent, we saw in the Holocaust. Jews, Israel, they were put in exile, and they had been, God wanted them to come back home, and He had been using tools throughout the centuries to cause them to turn back towards the promised land. Persecution is going to happen anyway. Jesus said you'd be persecuted. But in the 1800s, many people chose to go to Israel, but many did not. And so when Hitler's people came, and a lot of them, they just kept staying and staying. And it's a sad story. And I'm not saying that, we could sit here and argue all day why this and why that. But I'm just telling you, He uses these things. He uses the things that we go through. So when one nation goes after another to try to wipe out, like we've seen so many, even the Native Americans here in this country, they fought many wars, and they also had many peace times. And David even had times of war, and the kings went to war. So war, I don't want to say it's necessary, but obviously it becomes necessary for different reasons, especially when people want to take your stuff. You're not going to stand and let somebody take your stuff. You're going to stand up. So Jesus said these things are necessary. They're part of the birth pains, and they're ultimately part of the picture to drive people to cry out for His rulership. And that's really what it's all about, is about His kingdom being established here in the earth, and His people worshiping, and the kings of the earth bowing and submitting to Him. So my challenge for you is to continue to pray that the nations will cry out for the Lord to come back. And so until next time, Joseph Floyd, Sound It Plain. I'll be writing more about this in the days ahead. There's a lot of good missions writing about this topic, about the nation's rage. Mike Bickle again, Psalms 2, Joel 2:28. And one thing you can pray is Psalm 67. I'm going to leave you with that. Let the nations be glad and rejoice. Amen.